Tēnā rawa mai anō e pā e tō mātai matua nui te rangi. I hōwia atua nui matua kaharawa, matua rungarawa, kia whakamoe titia kōkoe. E kaha tatai manaaki ke atuana, ia tatai mātou, ai te ao, ai te pō, ai ngā wā katoa. Tau mai nā ki roto ki a tatai mātou ki tēnei wā tonu nei. Noho tonu mai ai, ki roto ki a tatai mātou hai awhi, hai kaha a tatou tiaki, hai kaha a tatou whakaarahi tonu anō, tohu tonu anō i a tatou mātou ki roto ki ngā mea katoa kai mua tonu i a tatou mātou ki tēnei wā tonu nei. Whakamoe miti whakanui. Ai tā ie hiuhi. Mene, ka piti hono ka tātai hono ko rātau rā tērā te mate ki a rātau. Ka piti hono ka tātai hono ko tātau mā tonu anō tēnei tātau. Ko te kāno hi ora ki a tātou mātou koai. Kei te mihi atu, tēnā rā tātou, a mauri ora. Kahuri, kia ora mai rā tātou, hoki tonu mai ki roto ki te TeTaiHauauru AukatiTai, ki te HawhauaoMo, hoki tonu mai ki roto ki Wairarapa Tararua ki te HawhauaoMo te TeTaiHauauru AukatiTai ki roto ki ngā kōrero a Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi meki taunaha wenua whakataunga kre me ki tēnei rā te Moteo te kā mārima, te ngahuru mārima, ki te Ngamaatoutou, 2024, rua mano, rua ngahuru mawha. Kia ora mai rā tātou. Yeah, welcome back. It's good to be back to te TeTaiHauauru AukatiTai, back into the moko ko, back to the kākawa. Ki te wāhi kei reira ngā āhuatanga katoa mai anō whakawhanake mai anō ai te hokinga mai o Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura ki roto tonu hoki ki a tātou mātou. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Yeah, so we are going to enjoy for today. I thought I'd start a little bit earlier today so that we get a bit of by the time we get a bit of a flow on with our kōrero, we are well within the 2 hours ahead of us. So yeah, it's about 10 minutes early, which is a good thing, because it allows us to get the initial formalities out of the way and help us to focus on the kaupapa ahead. And our one kaupapa today, the OuMaanei today, the OuMaanei, the TeTiriti, and we have some really interesting kōrero for everybody today. Before we go back into the marquee, up in the marquee, that's where we will, and I know we've been focusing on the te reo version, okay, the Tahumaakaaka nuimatua Hapu o Tutura, Hapu iwi, awa Hapu iwi, and Moai Hapu iwi version of TeTiriti, of the OuMaanei. Okay, we've been doing a lot of that, and we've made sure that everyone understands right from the outset that the treaty was a fraud. Okay, we need to get our heads around that real quickly. because for far too long now, takaroa nui ho, te karauna takaroa nui ho, te taha ki te rora, the law, the justice system, the mana tika of the country has been tarrying around, throwing into the debate the kōrero around sovereignty, and they quickly, I might add, quite rapidly came to the conclusion that sovereignty was ceded happily by our tūpuna, which is incorrect. You know why. You understand exactly what's happened here. And the misunderstandings clearly between mana wenua and the crown. Okay, you also understand quite clearly e tatauma exactly what the goals of each of the groups were. Okay? Quite clearly at the front of the minds of our tūpuna, lawlessness in the country, the necessity for the crown to take responsibility for their people and for our, this is not apartheid, by the way. I've had this fired at me. Are you people supporters of apartheid? And I laughed. I said, far from that. Far from that. We think because it seems like a dual system or a system of two laws and two governments. Now what it is, it's a system of one parliament with two governing bodies, with equal power shares. But one governing body is responsible for the mana wenua, or the people of the land, and the other governing body is responsible for all the laws and the governing necessities for those of the incoming. Okay, so just to get a bit of a context around everything, where we're at, where we've brought TeTiriti to, where our understandings clearly are. Firstly, that TeTiriti was a fraud. We need to understand that, and we've proven that outright. Okay, in the last time we talked about TeTiriti, we went into some conclusions, clearly drawn and easily drawn to, in terms of being conclusions that were quite clear by the outcome of the last kōrero in the Māki. That's in the north. And look, e tatauma, we came to a clear understanding of exactly what each of the aims were and exactly what we had by the end of it, by the time that the New Zealand Crown Corporation was empowered by seemingly the Crown. They certainly weren't empowered by us. Perhaps they took it that as the OuMaanei had been signed by our tūpuna, that was enough to empower the New Zealand Crown Corporation. It can be argued that they had a legal hold on the country, because that clearly is not who the OuMaanei or the MagnaCarta formally makes its contractual agreements between. Okay? The New Zealand Crown Corporation is a totally different entity. We're pretty sure, we're fairly certain that we made the contractual agreements that were made in the original intentions of TeTiriti of the OuMaanei with the Crown, with the Queen of that time, and everyone was quite happy to do that. We knew exactly what was at the forefront of our minds, what was most important, and what was crazy about that whole time is that many of us knew, many of our tūpuna knew that that's exactly what we might get, see. So we had a very, very interesting event take place in that day of February 6th, 1840. Okay, very, very interesting, and we know, of course, the influences that were at play, that had a role to play, and that were right at the coalface there, right in amongst it there, right within the actual event. Okay, but other things we tend to miss is the existence of other hapu iwi within that whole event. Most people tend to say ngā puhi. Well, clearly there's not just ngā puhi there. We may have had some put onto paper. See, these are some of the things we need to be very, very careful about. And that largely is what today's kōrero is going to focus on. The literary side and how it was manipulated by the crown. Okay, highly manipulated. And yes, we see that all of that clearly. In other words, what I'm saying is, apart from and in addition to what we already know, what we already understand comprehensively already about what exactly happened with TeTiriti, what we need to understand from here, e tātou mā, is that there's a lot more to it. Okay, so we're going to delve a fair bit deeper into the literary value of our argument to understand exactly what the goals were of the Crown. And exactly, I mean, yeah, straight away it seemed like for our tūpuna that they were certainly going to get what they wanted, what they had for so long desired to have through kohuiarau, te runanga kohuiarau, te waka minanga o te runanga kohuiarau. Aroha mai. And so once we understand how things were organised with our tūpuna and far more around exactly what their thinking was at that very time, the state of te reo, okay, very, very strong, but already on the decline. 20 years in. We're over 20 years in. Okay, so understand all those things. So we were already being attacked in the background there in terms of our te reo. Decrease was on the rise, and in the quality of te reo, and also change was on the rise. Okay, what we're going to do, yeah, we're highly focused on the te reo version. Why? Because it's the legal version. Okay, we shouldn't really be focusing on the reo Pākehā version, simply because it's not the legal version. Okay, within the te reo version we have the original intentions. Within the reo Pākehā we don't. So a small part today, though we're going to focus largely on the te reo version, the Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi version, Tawa Hapu iwi version, and Moai Hapu iwi version, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the English version as well. I haven't got a version of the exact wording as we know that you can gather from various copies of texts from amongst Busby's records and the like. Though we do know that the original copy was lost, and we also understand that's unfathomable how they might have lost that. But however, e tatauma, what we need to understand is we do have an English version. I don't have a copy of that at the moment, but we do have an English version now. I want to talk about it. I want to talk about just a little about that English version before we get into... I'll go back over some of the details there, because present there was also Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. Present there at the event was also Māmoe Hapu iwi whā nauri. Present there also was Te Awa Hapu iwi. And present there also was Moai Hapu iwi. Okay, we know they were there because we know the connections of the various tupuna that were there involved with that event. Okay, so yeah, you've got to dig around a bit. You can't always... we tend to be too dependent on literary forms. So that's where I guess I have an advantage over most people, because I've never been that. I've never been dependent on literary forms. My dependency is te kōrero I te waha tonu. See, te kōrero I te waha tonu, te kupu I te waha, te tika o te kōrero, te pū I te ngutu, pēnā tonu, pēnā rawa, I te āhua te kōrero me o nā hehane, me o hona Māori tonu o te āhua I te waho tonu mai, hoki ati tonu no ki roto tonu mai, o te āhua o te kōrero. Yeah, so I'm one always dependent on the spoken word, and I've always been that way. I had to really learn the hard way sometimes, how to be dependent on literary forms and devices. Needless as it is to say, I was always how do I put that? I was always destined. Yeah, you know, fate was always going to be on my side there. That I was always going to be an academic of some form. Why? Because of my chiefly status within Wairarapa Tarantua. Hei ai te reo. You know, in most cases, right through my upbringing, te mea, I've always been able to dominate, even though I didn't go purposely all out to do that. I've always been able to dominate in kaupapa Māori circles and kaupapa Tuturu, kaupapa Hapu, kaupapa uri, whānau, ahane. I've always been able to. I've always been put in the lead, leading, you know, te mea. So I've had that sort of upbringing, and I haven't always enjoyed that leadership, because I've always, you know, in the times when everyone thought it was kahunu rangitāne, for instance, right through those times, the mid-80s, round about there, right through those times, it was an extremely critical time for me, but it was a time where I started to pull out of everything. I wasn't interested in leading either of those groups, or for or with. And I'll tell you why, because I always understood our tūturutanga far better than anybody else. And this is including our korona kuia of those times. I must point that out. I have many seniorships to me, and Korua Kuia that have asked me to analyse a lot of the work that I've done with a lot of our Korua Kuia. But for those ones specifically, those ones who have had much to do with Kahunurangitāne, yes, I've been dominant right across them as well. However, for my own Korua Kuia kaumātua pahake, it's a little bit different. They've always dominated me, and that's who's led me right through into the success that I have, and my success within the area and the space. They're a totally different kettle of fish, and these are the kuia korua, the kaumātua, the pakeke. Even, I've had a small number from amongst the tūhoe. My own Neni Tirana, for instance. Neni Pere. Kuaima no. The old fella, kaumātua, tūrei. Era tonu hoki katoa, and tērā waku kaumātua, ati motikaretu, te toihaura. Okay, te toihau. And so we, a number of my own kaumātua that I have, that I can keep up there on that rightful pedestal, as people that have directed and guided me along the way into the success that I've had and am still having. Most people are expecting so much more, and I think rightfully so, because we're definitely headed that way. Those people being a bit of a wet blanket in there, for instance, the Crown or the New Zealand Crown Corporation, terribly wet blanket sort of style of doing things. We're getting highly hawhauaomo with that. We're quite sick of that. Mate tonu hoki mātau, mate ke hoki mātau, I rā tūāhua tanga katoa. They've got to stop being the wet blanket, or stop trying to put the brakes on. With us, that's a two-way way of doing things. You're not to know, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're working with people that shouldn't be treated that way. Okay, and we were one of those groups. Tūhoe learnt their lesson. They should never have treated us that way. However, all these groups were there, but never in the history of the event of the signing of the OuMaanei have people being forthcoming or very vocal about all these other super tribal groups being part of the signing of the OuMaanei. Why? Probably because a number of ours disagreed to sign it, and in particular, all of those groups are ours. Okay? Te Whatuia Piti being one of the main Tina groups there of ours. They're the 7th line and the Tina line, the last line of HawhauaoMo, of Te Ao Matarahi Matua, that's the 6th line. The 5th line of ancestry descent, and the Tahirua Toru, the 3rd line of Uretārewa descent of our Hapu iwi of Tahumaakaaka nuimatua, Hapu o Tutura Hapu iwi. Notice I'm using the full name these days. Now and again you'll get there, because we need to. People don't know. People are trying to make sure that they know which of the tahu that they're talking about. Well, Tahumaakaaka nuimatua is just simply short for Tahumaakaaka nuimatua or Tutura. Okay, and so but e tatauma, we get to the Te version today with a bit more depth and with a bit more detail there, in understanding exactly what happened. And I'm just starting to slowly, gradually, and slowly but surely, get into the rhythm of recapping exactly where we are, so that everyone, you know, we've possibly got a lot of new listeners on board, looking to learn a bit about exactly what we're saying about TeTiriti. Well, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. It was a funny thing when we first posted our translations of TeTiriti, of the OuMaanei. We did that on purpose, and we did that in order to see exactly where the understandings of the people were, especially of the super tribes of the country around TeTiriti, how well we understood that, the OuMaanei, and how well we could formulate highly educated views around exactly what the OuMaanei, or the MagnaCarta, can be defined as saying. We came to the let's firstly look at the Rel version translation now that they've got. I mean, this is just recent. They've now got a translation in the Waitangi Tribunal a website of the Rel version, which is perhaps a little bit too summary, and perhaps does not highlight some very critical contexts in its translation. That's a good translation. It's a very fair translation. We still would count that out. Okay? And based on that fact that there's some very critical contexts that should be highlighted in there, that are not in the Te Reo version. Okay, where the translation actually is predominantly taken from the evening, you know, when the English version actually came out, and they started to talk around the conundrum of the time. Okay, a funny thing that the Waitangi Tribunal would miss a lot of these critical areas in terms of context. Context is everything. When we're talking about translations of Te Reo into English, contexts are everything. Because from there, linguists and professional translators as well can derive from that exactly, and we've already pointed that out, that the misinterpretation of the whole of the translation into English is clear. Okay, so there's clear misinterpretation, there's clear fraudulence in that, within that particular translation, and a total avoidance of the actual nuance and the actual simple fact that a nuance like that, like te ka wanatanga, dash te ka wanatanga. Yeah, in anybody's language you must translate that in its literal sense. Okay, which does not mean, handed over sovereignty fully and absolutely, which is what they say on the Waitangi Tribunal website, much to my dismay. much to my dismay, e tatauma. Okay, luckily we've got our translation. We still discount the translation of the Waitangi Tribunal, and we still say that ours is the safest translation of the Te Reo version. But we're going to use their English translation today. We're going to use their English translation today, and that's for the small part today that we've got, that we're going to focus on the English translation. We understand the fourth article. We know what that's all about. That is everything being said to have been in accordance with international law, the law of contra preferentum, which guarantees that the indigenous native version of the OuMaanei of the MagnaCarta is the legal version. So we've been treating it as such, and rightfully so, because it's the only version with the original intentions still in there. And that's what we need. That's what we need. We don't need this rubbishy English version that totally, and with absolute foul play, mixed in with all of that. The whole of the fraudulent and corrupt, and the fashion in which these particular Crown representatives, Crown representatives wish to carry out this major heist. Massive proportions in heist went down here. So we need to think about that, those magnitudes. It's phenomenal what was taking place on February 6th, 1840, and amongst all those influences, and amongst all those pressures that were going on there within that circle of people, if you like, or can we call it perhaps it's just a normal court. They held the whole event. It was like a court where you had your front, where you had your dignitaries of those who were the incoming, representing those of the incoming, and then you had all your groups of our tupuna in there as the mana wenua, representing all of our super tribes of the country, and in fact all of our super tribes of the north who had connections from right throughout the country into the north. So these are the contexts, if you like, if I can put it that way, the context. Highly important for us to understand context in the translating mode of things. Okay? Now they missed a lot of that in the Waitangi Tribunal, but we're going to use that English version in our kōrero today. And we're going to use it because the understanding that we can glean still from that gives us a clear indication of the extent of misunderstanding, mistranslation, and miscommunication going on amongst even government and Crown entities, organizations who do not realize but the extent of corrupted matter within their interpretation is huge. Okay, so in our recap as well, let's look at exactly what we covered the fourth article as well in our last kōrero. We covered much in-depth material already in our last kōrero, so we should have got a fairly good understanding of exactly where things were at. Double meanings, a deceiving appearance of the Te Reo version. This is the legal document too, by the way, that if you translated it one way, it would say one thing, and then if you translated it the other way, it would say another thing. That's hugely in-depth, and that tells us that this whole document is fraudulent. And I pinpointed early that particular nuance of Article 1. Now, that particular nuance is critical for us to understand. It's a context worth exploring, and that's why I pointed it out. But it's not the only context, as you can see, because where we've come to is highly critical as well. And there's a number of other contexts in there and a bit more depth of understanding. When we get to the Mākei in the next kōrero for TeTiriti e Tatauma, what we're going to be able to understand is what happens when we join on the preamble. Okay, and the exact influence and authority of the preamble. Again, we focus on our translation and being highly critical and understanding all of the contexts. Again, I've looked at the Waitangi Tribunal's translation of the preamble, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It misses the context. And this is, I can remember saying that about Apira Ngata and his translation. You know, he was a native speaker of Broirangi. Hapu uretārewa whānauri. Now, he gave it a go, and a very courageous attempt there was. And what did I give it? Something like 40%. And that's really, really generous. That's really, really generous. Now, other people from amongst the tribes of the United Tribes of the Broirangi would actually just give him around about 10%. Yeah, and that's probably round about right too. 10-15% if you're really, really tough on him. But I was especially not, because I thought he gave it one of the best attempts, but missed a lot of the major critical contexts. And that's what can happen. And the Waitangi Tribunal's done the same thing on their website. If you can get a copy of their translations, though we count them out as particularly specific to being able to define critically and vitally the meanings of words and phrases in the OuMaanei. They need to be translated. You can't be too overly general and summary when you translate these contexts, because then you totally miss the comprehensive ways in which those kupu and ngā takotoranga o ngā kupu, you know, you if you miss those, you miss entirely the way in which they were manipulated by the Crown. Okay? Highly manipulated. So, it's a pity that the Waitangi Tribunal translations are particularly far too general, far too summary. Though they're good translations, there's no real attempt to look at exact contexts and all of the contexts within the written document. There's just how can I put it? There's perhaps far too much confidence in their understanding, their comprehension of te reo in a very general, a very across the board manner. Yeah. There's a confidence in that, and perhaps far too much confidence, because in that whole wave of translation, they've missed a lot of context. And that's what can happen with reo like this. This is reo hapu iwi. Remember our little chat about reo hapu iwi. Very confidential. This is reo that wouldn't usually go outside of the hapu iwi. Okay? It's also reo written in a particular way. It's reo that is perhaps more, how can I put it? It's perhaps more exemplary of perhaps a stage 2 or 3 attempt of the reo hapu iwi. If I can just put it that way, it's an attempt at that. But it's far from that. It does not suffice that. Okay? And it's also a valiant attempt at trying to make that reo far more publicly understood, far better understood, and highly accepted as well. Just utilising reo hapu iwi gave it so much mana for a start. So huge mana in the reo. The way in which they utilise that with reo a hapu iwi gives us further context in there. These are a lot of contexts that the Waitangi Tribunal has missed. Along, because of their overconfidence and their ability to translate, right, across the board. Far too across the board. Because when you're translating reo hapu iwi, you're translating the reo hapu of one of the most powerful, one of the most senior, one of the preeminent super tribes, one of the states, one of the nations of the country, or a reo that was shared between 3 in particular. Okay? Now, in that time, for the Crown to utilise this reo in that way, it wasn't strange or weird. It just was very rare. Okay? And was very rare to use publicly in that way. But in terms that they utilised it in a different stage or make, that's what made it more acceptable to the hapu iwi, whose reo that was. Okay, and whose reo it still is. Okay? Just a bit more context there on the confidentiality, the personal, the contractual, the intimacy involved around such a reo. All of those matters taken into account, we can understand why it's such an intimately confidential or matatapu reo. Okay, or private reo, a reo for private communications. Okay, tatama? Are we back on board with exactly where we are yet? I think we probably are. And also, one of the things I've failed to share with you also widely about the reo hapu iwi is that it is a reo pakeke. Okay? He reo taipakike, he reo kuia, koroua, kaumātua, pahake, he reo no te pakike. Okay? So it's an adult's language. Okay? So how do our children learn that? Well, they didn't usually get to speak this reo. But once they got to around about 18 years of age, they could understand such a reo. Okay, and began to widely utilize that reo. Their aroha mai, their peers and their all the adults responsible for their upbringing, their teachers, te mea, would never utilize that reo with them. Largely from right throughout their lives, the children could not understand what was being talked about within that reo. Sometimes they might get a bit of gist. But highly personal, highly detailed, highly distinctive, and succinct are the matters and the ways in which one utilized such a reo. So we need to get those contexts right. And this is why I make the assessment and the examination and the analysis upon the translations of the Waitangi Tribunal. They need to go back to the drawing board, because the critical contexts in TeTiriti, in the OuMaanei, are missing from their translations. Luckily we have those within our translations. So, and I have a copy of our translation on hand. I have a copy of the Waitangi Tribunal translations on hand. We'll also use their translation for the preamble once I come to that in the OuMaanei. Sorry, not in the OuMaanei, in the Mākei, in the Tutura AukatiTai, and we'll be reaching into that, having a good look at all of the kōrero and that in depth, and how manipulative as well that kōrero is, and the whole of the makings of this huge deal. It's huge, eh? It's huge. It's a huge deal, and it's a huge deal. Why? Because it's such a massive a heist of massive proportions. The magnitude is huge, and especially today, in today's context, we're talking multi-trillions upon trillions of dollars worth of heist. Okay, because that's how much it matches up to today. Okay, so let's look back at what we concluded with right at the end there of our last kōrero around TeTiriti e Tatauma. The conclusions were we understand the fourth article. We know what that was all about. That was taken out of, to them, that wasn't necessary. What did that do? What did that achieve for the Crown? That achieved all focus on the English version, which gave us the fraudulent outcomes of TeTiriti, of the whole of the signings, right through the whole of those 7 hasty months of signing throughout the country. By the end, what stood clearly above all and internationally was this English version, which gave them the right, the New Zealand Crown Corporation, to apply this fraudulent and illegal interpretation of the original intentions of TeTiriti to the motu. Okay, achievements, not only that, but fraud, a heist of massive proportions. I think at one point, I think last week, I spoke about the TeTiriti and I described it as magnificent proportions. Well, hopefully people understood what I meant by that. I didn't mean that it was a great thing. far from it. Quite far from that, from being anything great or anything I'm impressed with. It in fact is a rip-off and a heist of massive proportions. I don't think many people yet have even started to get their heads around it. Okay? But the understanding is clear. Okay, we have fraud, we have a heist, we have and manipulated understanding as well. This is for the Crown. And manipulated understanding as well of exactly what the treaty original intentions were. And this is what it said. It said one law, one government. See what happens when you translate it in one certain way, all the meanings slide to that way. So that's what it said in the English version. We're going to have a little bit of a look at that later on. But first of all, we've got a lot more to have a look at in the in the process of looking at Te Reo in a little bit more in-depth fashion. Okay. We also have the Crown looking as if acting, even in the internationally placed eyes of the world, acting within legal means. Okay. We don't. Largely, what we don't understand is the actual Crown and Westminster role in all of this, because what it seemed like over that time is that largely Crown representatives of the country and the New Zealand Crown Corporation were actually acting in unison. We're actually acting outside of their legal roles under the Crown and under Westminster. We can assume that were the case. We can presume that were the case. But waiting in the wings, we're highly anticipating that were not the case. Okay? We're highly anticipating that were not the case. And Westminster would need to answer to that. Okay? Westminster would need to answer to that. They would need to play a role in that, and it wouldn't be just the New Zealand Crown Corporation who illegally took hold of the country in September of 1840. Why? Because we had never voted them in. Why? Because we were never consulted before they even came into power. They were never, though they, in those times from September, spoke to the country as though they were the embodiment of the Crown. They were not the Crown. They were not the people that we had just signed contractual agreements with. Okay? What would have been good over those times is if we could have discussed the OuMaanei at length to some degree. There was no allowance for that. This is what impacts this whole deal. There was none of that. There was no room for consultation, further consultations. There was no room. I understand that the Queen was even sick during those times, or in a mode of depression, or something like that at that time. Once she was well enough, why were our tupuna not able to be involved in consultations with her directly? Yeah. There were a lot of... And what do you call that? You call that... lacking in transparency. Okay? So it's highly unethical, highly lacking in transparency, the way in which the OuMaanei, the MagnaCarta, TeTiriti, was conducted, right through even the 7 months to follow. Okay, highly non-transparent. Why haven't the courts discussed any of that? Why haven't people who have got around TeTiriti and the whole event discussed any of that? Because there's far too much space for doubt in the actual interpretation. You know, the Waitangi Tribunal English interpretation really says it all. It really says it all. The total miss of exactly what the words and the phrases and the actual definitions and meanings of those words, all of the contexts and exactly what they're critically saying, and the whole of the mix. Which means to say, whoever translated this from the tribunal would actually get sucked in. If they were one of the tupuna of that time, they would get clearly sucked in quite easily by TeTiriti and be taken for a ride. Okay, that's even with consultations, further consultations before we actually got to the signings, etc., etc., etc. No, demand. Okay, but none of that took place. None of that took place. Okay, quite unfair that, and quite unethical. We need to question those areas of the whole of the event. We need to question that evening when the English version was brought out. We need to question the whole of the miss. There's another context, the whole of the miss of the interpretation, the translation of the nuance. Totally missed out in the translation. Totally overlooked, in other words. So easy to overlook things when you're so confident in translating so generally or right across the board. And that's how we've viewed the translation of the Waitangi Tribunal. Though it be, fine English, they got very good English, I must give them that. But their ability to translate leo of this quality and of this form, they're missing a lot there. They're missing a whole myriad of things, of capabilities and understandings. Their comprehension, aroha mai, is totally lacking. Okay, so and then I put at the end, they weren't acting within legal means at all. And that gets worse as we get into the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into 1912 to the 1920s, 1920s to 1940s and 50s. Whew. Exactly what they were aiming to do. Totally, almost wipe us out. They certainly did that culturally. They certainly did that spiritually. They certainly did that super tribally. They knocked us right out of the way. But they did it with fraud. See, there was nothing legal about any of the intentions of the Crown at all, right through this whole thing. So, and what did the Ariki and Hapu achieve? That's the way I put that in our last kōrero. Unhappy, very anxious. Anxious about the simple fact that they may not, in fact, have achieved what was at the forefront of their minds, They wanted the early settlers to be taken control of. There was so much trouble in the land, and that started from the early 1780s, 90s, right into 1815, where te wakaminenga o te rūnanga ko huiarau, the Great Assembly, the Congress of the Great Assembly of the multitudes of the super tribes. That's what we're talking about, of the super tribes. Okay, so let's carry on through with the recap, and then we have the next 7 months. Everything, is being pushed and forced at such a fast pace. It's no wonder there's so much anxiety, there's so much worry setting in, especially by September, when the New Zealand Crown Corporation took over. Okay. And what did they do? Our super tribes, our Ariki and Hapu, our united tribes and or super tribes, of preeminent super tribes, of states, of nations of the Mutu. What else did they achieve? They achieved the ability to hold strong to what actually were the original intentions of TeTiriti. What was that? What did we clarify that as being? 2 laws, 2 governments. Okay? But 1 nation, 1 parliament. That's what we were talking about via the original intentions of the treaty. Okay, and it's clear, very, very clear in our reo. I mean, we would never say that if that weren't the case. And right through the last 27 years in our re-establishment of Tahumaakaaka, nuimatua o Tutura, Hapu, iwi, I mean, we've used that nuance widely. We talk about that nuance in Article 1. Why? Because actually it sticks out like a sore thumb. It was missed in terms of the translation into the English version, purposely, and again conveniently. And we still think the original English version of TeTiriti was lost conveniently. We still say that. Okay, so not much in terms of the aims of the Ariki and Hapu of the Motu, or even of the North, who could be seen as communiques and also as confidants, and also connections, interconnections, interrelations with all our super tribes in the Motu. That's why they wanted to deal with the North. It wasn't because of Ngā Puhi. Okay? Now let's understand all of this clearly. Reo Hapu iwi, in its 4th stage, most of you wouldn't know, but some of you probably had a taste of that. Some of you have possibly been able to be part of translation projects that have translated documents like letters, in te reo Hapu iwi. That in particular is te reo Hapu iwi. Okay? Or similar to that, te reo Hapu ure tārewa whānauri can also be seen to being utilised. by some of our Hapu Uneta Rewa Whānauri. Taken, of course, from the iwi, or the Hapu iwi, that they derive of. The most lineal, the most direct. Or both. So here's where we're today, e tatauma. Here's where we're today. We're right into, again, we're going to look at some more of those contexts. Because those contexts mean everything. They're critical to the understanding. They're critical to knowing where our tūpuna, our ancestors, and all their ancestries, diuri whānauri, the Hapu Uneta Rewa Whānauri, the iwi aroha mai, the Hapu iwi whānauri, and also the Hapu iwi, how they were manipulated right from that moment, right from the event, right through even the 7 months that hastily followed. Okay? Now, we'll get into those at some point. So, after the maki, when we eventually, after the Te Tai Tonga AukatiTai, we come back to Wairarapa, one of those, either that one or the next one in the maki, we will start to talk about that 7 months and how speedily things were done and exactly how they were done. Okay, lots and lots of kōrero here for us to, we need to broaden our understanding and deepen our understanding on TeTiriti, because largely most of the contexts in the whole of this argument are missing. Okay, and you can see that in the Waitangi Tribunal's translations. Far too general, far too summary, far too right across the board. Okay? You get that because in the motu today, we've got this understanding that Māori makes us all one. Kai te he tēnā kōrero. Kai te he tēnā kōrero. Mai tētahi iwi ki tētahi, te te kē tonu, te Māori. Okay? Te ke tonu te Māori. Now, Tūhoe still say they have the reo when the reo was one. Well, it still doesn't matter to us. We've always been super tribal. That's never changed. If we suddenly, prior to entering into Pacifica, we suddenly thought of ourselves as one people, fine that, but it didn't last long. Okay, so why bother with looking at a reo like that? You know, we understand why Tūhoe says, oh, yeah, we're just like English, we can personalize ourselves. That we're kai te he tēnā. We've always been super tribal. We have never been one people, and especially one people under Tūhoe or awa. Never in our heritage have we ever been. Why? Because they're too junior, and it shows. Okay, so yeah, let's just get those contexts right before we move forward. As I say in the maki, we will focus on the preamble, but we're still on the just grabbing my my copy of the Te Reo version of TeTiriti, and we are focusing still on contexts in the written, because if we don't do that, we're going to be totally missing the boat on this whole thing. Okay. Now, a big question for everybody. I wonder where the tribunal stands on this. I mean, they've certainly, if you have a good look at their translations, they've certainly gone to a lot of work to translate these documents. And I appreciate that and I value that. However, the translations are not good enough. The quality of the translations are just not good enough. Not only that, but the interpretations, kai te he. Kai te he ngā kōrero nā I whakatakoto ai a wairua ke atu I te wairua o te kōrero nei I TeTiriti. Let's not forget this is not their reo hapu iwi, obviously. Because it's ours, we can translate it so much more accurately than anybody else, and it shows. Okay? Now, one of the questions I would love to put to the Waitangi Tribunal translators, of their, who came up with their version of translations of TeTiriti, is, do they think that this OuMaanei was put together in, of course, the 1 to 3 days that they said it was put together? Or do they think it was at least 2 to 3 years? Because the way they have translated it would suggest that possibly they would take it as having been translated, having been put together within the 2 to 3 years. You can't tell me that this document in Te Reo, I mean, if you look at the standard and the quality of the English that they use, we're not going to get to it yet, but I just want to make these points that if you look at the Waitangi Tribunal versions, I mean, the English is so beautiful. It's beautiful English. Even I couldn't do it, but I possibly could if I really, really focused on it. But then it would probably take me a number of months, to even get it to the point that they've got it. Do they really think in the Waitangi Tribunal that actually these people that translated into Te Reo, TeTiriti and the OuMaanei were actually that good at speaking Te Reo? Because they were not. They were not. Okay? They were not that good. So, exactly what they're trying to say that they're saying in the OuMaanei, in their translation, is probably, a fair bit off, because they're missing context. And some of these contexts are important to understand. And that's what we're going to run through today. We're more of the understanding that this took more than just a couple of days to put together, because there's too much going on here. Okay, far too much going on here. And with so much going on here, you can't tell me that was put together in 1 to 3 days. You can't tell any of Tahumaakaaka nuimatua that their standard of Te Reo was just as good as the Waitangi Tribunal's standard of English. Kai te he tēnā kōrero. Okay? And in their hasty and overconfident manner of translating, they missed some major contexts. So, yes, it was made to seem like it was hastily put together, like, for instance, in the Te Reo, in the kaiwhea tēnā, I'm not even looking at the first. Ko te tuatahi, in the first, ko ngā rangatira o te whakaminenga me ngā rangatira katoa hoki ki hai uru ki taua wakaminenga. Ka tikura wāti ki te kuini o ingarani. A ke tonu atu, dash, te kāwanatanga katoa, o rātou wenua. Okay? And in the that's in the Waitangi Tribunal translation. I'm going to draw a comparison in there. Sorry, I got to that particular point and I looked at the wrong. Actual the wrong actual article and talking around that point, and that article would be Article 2 and it would be in the errors that are in there in ne ngā rangatira. That's what it reads, is ne, but we can tell what that means now. A little bit too obvious. The same as in the preamble. There's some intentional errors in there. The document certainly looks like it was hurried, but when we get the full understanding of all of the contexts operating and manipulated within this document, we get a better understanding of exactly what's going on here. And so the errors that are in there are merely to manipulate the reader into thinking that this was hastily put together, whereas in actual fact, because of our understanding of the full deceitful and manipulated way in which the TeTiriti or the OuMaanei was about to be utilized within this signing, we begin to understand that all these things had to have been put together, not actually in haste, but with a lot more thought and a lot more time taken over them, and with a lot more effort, especially in the deal. Quite a clear-cut deal. Whereas when you look at the Hefakaputanga and you look at the differences, 5 years, we can at least go back, probably 2 to 3 years in this to understand the amount of work that's been put into this. Okay? So we would disagree that this took 2 to 3 days as well. And by the looks of the translation of the Waitangi Tribunal, indeed, that exactly might be the understanding of the Waitangi Tribunal as well. Well, at least they give that impression. They may still not be the actual understanding, but they give that impression. And I'll point out to that error in the actual original document, where in the second part of the second article it says Otiia, ko ngā rangatira o te wakaminenga ne ngā rangatira. So there's a misspelling there. Instead of a me, there's ne. Okay? Ne ngā rangatira katoa atu, ka tiku ki te kuini, te hoko ngā wera wahi. Our tūpuna wouldn't have seen those slights in the written of the document as anything to write home about. Not at that time. In fact, they wouldn't have even understood the part that they played in the whole of the context of everything. Okay? And so we have ne ngā rangatira, te mea, li te ngau te tū, ko te kai, hei kai hoko mōna. Okay, not too bad, a lot of this. But, there are far better ways to put things like that. Hei kai hoko mōna. Okay, something like that is not necessarily as traditionally put as it could have been. Okay, where we get to the ending there. Let's look at the end. Takotoranga kōrero, te whakapuakinga, te takotoranga kupu, which says, after the dash, ki te ritenga o te utu e wakaritea ai e rā tōu ko te kai hoko e mea tiani te kuini hei kai hoko mōna. Okay, that's not a standard reo hapu or even reo matua way of saying that. You know, the ending there, hei kai hoko mōna. Okay, not even our way. Yeah, we would not put that in that way. Okay, so I just want to point out a lot of those things. I pointed out another aspect worth denoting in our last kōrero, in the first dash in the second article as well, where you have the first dash and then ki ngā tāngata katoa o nuimatua. Te tino rangatiratanga o rātou wenua, o rātou kāinga, me o rātou tāunga katoa. Okay, full stop. Okay, I make that particular denotion in that particular part of our kōrero there in TeTiriti, because it is one specifically appealing to those who speak this reo. Okay, that is in particular, you know, it's like an appeal to them when you use reo of this nature. This is reo of an old kōhatu nature. This is reo of natives, native speakers, native indigenous to this reo would utilize this such kupu in this way. Okay, other aspects we need to take note of is the simple change from nuitireni to nuitirani. What sort of effect does this have to the ears? When you're a native speaker and you're within the audience, and you're you're a part of our tūpuna, how does this affect you? We don't, as native speakers, because I'm one, as native speakers, we don't just take that. It's just, hai aha nui ho tērā. He putake o te e ki te a. Ka hore nui ho te mea. You know? Kore mā hara hara o tata mātou ki tēnā tua huatanga. And that would be the attitude of someone who does not know this reo as well as we do. See, within that particular context is saying a whole lot more different than what we would usually say. Okay, and we're not just being fickle there. This is highly important to understand this particular context. Everyone thinks in terms of English speakers of English, you know, how they see a dialect in particular as how, you know, these are some of those racial sort of slurs that go on in Parliament, of all places, where you are forced to think of things in a certain way. Because you are Māori, you must think of this in this way. So if my context in what I say changes from nuitireni to nuitirani, korehea. Korehea hanui ho. There's no real big deal. Kai te he tēnā. Kai te he tēnā. Te takoto o te kupu ki ngā tāngata katoa o nuitirani. Te tino rangatiratanga. Even that concept, te tino rangatiratanga. In the context of everything, we have reo hapu iwi definitely going on here. We have reo hapu iwi me te takotoranga atu o te reo hapu iwi ki roto. Kai roto tonu tēnā i tēnei reo hapu iwi. And most of us would go through the translating of this thinking, well, that if we think in the Pākehā manner of thinking around a dialect, then we don't care about that. To us, that doesn't. Kai te he tēnā. Kai te he tēnā. If you're one of the people, native indigenous to that reo. You know why? Because when people, I'm not too sure whether it was Hoani Waititi or whether it was some of his Pākehā peers. It probably was some of his Pākehā peers, and that's how he came to understand our reo, perhaps, Hoani Waititi, and he interpreted our reo a hapu iwi as dialects. And that's not actually the case. See? And that's why we need to talk a lot more in depth about the context of this reo. Okay, because what we have happening here is a huge amount of manipulation. There's a huge appeal to the most preeminent, the most prominent in the north, which are not ngā puhi. There's Moai hapu who are there. There's te awa hapu iwi who are there. Moai hapu iwi, just for your understanding, iwi. And Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura hapu iwi who are there. Okay? There is no indication that who we're talking about here is ngā puhi. And yet most of the kōrero I've heard around the event of the signing of TeTiriti would assume and presume and would be as presumptuous as to say, most of this is based in the north, so it regards ngā puhi. Same with he whakaputanga regards ngā puhi. Kai te he tēnā. Kai te he tēnā kōrero. Okay, a lot of different contexts in here where different phrases are used slightly out of form. And they're done intentionally, e tatauma, like that one. Ki te ritenga o te utu, e waka ritea ai e rātou, ko te kaihoko e meatia nei te kuini, hei kaihoko mōna. There's purposely a Pākehā, or let's put it more specifically, a karauna understanding of ability to utilise te reo. But it's done intentionally. I mean, we know that they're far better than that because of the way that they conducted in some ways, you know, like ki ngā tāngata katoa o nuitirani, te tino rangatiratanga o rātou wenga, o rātou kāinga, me o rātou taonga katoa. Okay? We need to think harder about these sorts of things. Because our dialects are not merely dialects, they're whole other reo. Te hanga mai o te takoto kupu, te āhua o te kōrero hia, ngā whakaaro, kairoto tonu. Huge context that we're missing out on e tātou mā if we really want to keep the reo of old, the original reo, then we need to pay more attention to these sorts of things e tātou mai. Okay? We need to take more notice of the context at play here. And especially in understanding TeTiriti or the OuMaanei. Why? Because e tātou mā, it was a fraud. That's why. It was a fraud. And there are particular ways in which they had decided long before the 3 days before the signing that they were going to work at and shape and formulate right into this whole deal. Why? Because they understood te reo far better than what they really are showing here. Does that make them a level one of today? It can be argued that perhaps maybe one of them might have been somewhere near there. I don't think so though. And my judgment is not usually that far wrong. Okay? If I was ever going to be wrong, that's hardly likely. Okay? So you need to understand contexts like that. You need to understand contexts like that. Te takoto mai o te reo a Hapu iwi is exactly that, reo a Hapu iwi, not necessarily just dialects. I mean, dialects to a Crown understanding and a Pākehā understanding are probably just reo that all mean the same, that everyone speaks the same language, but then they have these different little particles in their reo that tell them they're from a certain tribe. That is the colonial understanding of this form of reo. But if you know our reo like I do, our original reo like I do, our reo proper like I do, then you know that they're not just merely that. There are whole, what did I say, even over the last couple of years we've been talking about varieties. Varieties of reo, vernaculars of reo. Remember that? Remember that? And that's what we have here. Okay? So if you're, utilising the reo a Hapu iwi as well, in their huge intentions there, huge intentions to appeal to the most preeminent and most prominent of the region. Okay, not just show this reo off to the motu or to the people that are there, that they are able to utilise that reo. I mean, they were basically the thing. Let's look at them as that. This is the Crown and the missionaries. Missionaries obviously under the control of the Crown of the time. Okay? Okay? And the ability to put some of these takotoranga kupu in the way that they have tells me that they have, though they may have even been ignorant of that at that time. But I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay? They had already, come from studying languages, ancient languages, the modern languages of that time even, right throughout the world. You can't tell me they didn't know that. And our reo a hapu iwi were not just merely dialects. I mean, we understand what that is. Everyone speaks one reo, and your dialect tells you what tribe you're from. That is Pākehā and Crown. That's their understanding of what a dialect is. And so they've applied it to our reo, which is what our reo are not. Okay? Our reo are super tribal hapu. Exactly what I'm calling them. Reo a hapu iwi. Whole other varieties. Whole other vernaculars. Just because I might use dialectual reo within my reo hapu iwi, that doesn't mean to say I'm trying to indicate I'm from some certain iwi. Only ai te he tēnā kōrero. Okay? I have a particular statement to make. If it's public, I can make that better. See, these are some of the things they're thinking. We can make that better, that statement better. We don't know reo hapu iwi as well as we appear to know it, but we can make our statements better via reo hapu iwi. And they may have, in fact, just, assumed that they understood that reo hapu iwi so well in that time, but I don't think they did. But then again, they used it in a very, very powerful way and well within context. Okay? They just stayed within reo hapu. They didn't move into the actual reo hapu iwi. Okay? It's far more noticeable, it's far more understandable on a universal basis. But let's remember, reo hapu iwi is not that sort of reo. So there are different reasons why they're going in and out of this reo. But they want that reo to hold the main carriage. So it doesn't really matter that these sort of dialectual forms are being utilized in there. Highly important, highly significant to our argument at Tauma. Was this highly influential in gaining the signatures? Remember, the main aim of these people was to just get those signatures. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Okay? They might not have got the Tewa hapu iwi exactly. They may not have got the Tahumaakaaka nuimatua hapu iwi exactly. They may not have got Moai hapu iwi exactly, but they got everybody else. They got everybody else. Okay? And let's face it, lawlessness prevailed. One of the outcomes for our tūpuna, lawlessness prevailed. Okay, they saw that eventually, especially when it came to having to stand up against Crown representatives going around the motu, thinking that they can totally apply the second part of the second article of TeTiriti. Okay? Which is, looking for, looking to purchase lands with the right of preemption. Still, our tūpuna had the right to say no. And because it was not customary for them to even have access to being able to transact land in a non-customary fashion, everyone stood up against it across the motu. even that alone shows how different the understandings of the original intentions of TeTiriti were, going in from 1843 into 1850. Follow those years, and all the kōrero comes to bear. HHRs, the Register of Chiefs, all of that kōrero. Interesting stuff. A lot of the censuses that were carried out, very poorly done too, I might add, but very, very interesting to see a lot of the different outcomes, the different tribal affiliations, and where exactly those tribal groups came from. Because, believe you me, in the north they weren't all ngāpuhi. Though, on a lot of documents you see ngāpuhi, eta. Everyone definitely was not ngāpuhi. Okay, and so, we have some interesting work with the different wording going on here. Okay. And why do I mention New Tireni? Well, because in he whakaputanga, where the reo is utilised there, the same reo, the same form of reo, but all of a sudden context is a little bit different. Okay? Context is a little bit different in there. Okay? In this one, context can be seen to be far more universal. Okay? A bit of a clue as to why he whakaputanga did not actually work as well as TeTiriti. See, so they mean a lot more. There's far more to these things than we think. And when we use dialectual modes of communication, let us not assume that the whole of this reo is a dialect. Kei te he tēnā. When we're talking reo a hapu iwi, we're talking a whole other variety of reo. There's a whole other body. Or in other words, he rerike tēnā reo ki te reo matua, he rerike anō tēnā reo ki te reo hapu. Hapu iwi, in this case. Okay? Are we getting a lot clearer picture there? So how did they manipulate this? Well, in the moment, e tā tauma, you can just see how instrumental that was in getting the signatures on the paper, and they were instrumental again and again and again, very, very quick concession right throughout the 7 months to follow. Okay? Right throughout the 7 months to follow. Okay, now we're going to have a little look at the English version. Not because we think it's just as important, no we don't, but we just want to show the contrasting outcomes of our translations in comparison to some of those that do not know this reo like we do, in depth like we do, and do not understand our kōhatu me te reo tēnā wā. like we do. I mean, they don't understand that particular sort of deal, and the order of that deal, and the kupu of that time. Leo Hapu iwi, in fact, has its own takotoranga kupu, and its own wairua e tatauma, and its own, let's say, mode of communication. It's a form of reo, obviously utilised by people within Tahumaakaaka nuimatua. We do not go outside of our hapu iwi in the use of our reo a hapu iwi. Let me put it that way. If we go into full reo a hapu iwi, it's highly likely that you probably won't understand much of our kōrero at all. You'll understand that we're in dialect, and you'll know whose dialect it is dialectually, but you won't necessarily understand all of the kōrero in that reo, no, because it's a totally different variety. Okay, so do you see and understand better the context at play here? Okay, we need to understand that to better understand how TeTiriti managed to manipulate our tūpuna and get them to sign. Okay, certainly looks like they're telling the truth. They certainly, hastily put this together. That's what it looks like. But if our tūpuna were able to work at this document and have a really good in-depth analysis and look and assessment of all of the contexts at play, we know for a fact that just like how the tribunal has come across in their current translation of TeTiriti e tatauma, that actually this had to have taken around 2 to 3 years, maybe just 2, maybe just 2 years. But it certainly did not take 1 to 3 days. Okay? I hate to say it, but as a fraud, as a heist, it was too well put together. Okay? And we have to remember that largely the context did not change as they rapidly took it through the motu over the next 7 months. Okay, so let's look at the Waitangi Tribunal translation. First of all, I'll go through ours. Now, we're going to translate we've already done that. We've already quickly looked at the 4th article, okay? That everything has been done with contra preferentia. That means the legal TeTiriti OuMaanei MagnaCarta is the native indigenous version of the TeTiriti OuMaanei MagnaCarta. Okay, that's what that means. But they discounted that, right? Anei, I te tuatahi, te takoto mai o te wairua o te kupu I te tiriti ki tā mātau. Ki tā mātau e ki te ai, ki tā mātau e tā tari ai, ki tā mātau e whakauti ai. Okay? Ko te tuatahi, because it's not in actual fact. Most people think, this could be taken in the context, see? In the context of this document, that is not as complete a phrase as people might want us to believe. Just merely ko te tuatahi in the whole context, see, again, context of this document is not entirely complete. Yet another of the moves to make this look like largely a document that was just thrown together. I'm totally, our tūpuna would have been totally oblivious to the fact that that was not true. If, indeed, they understood just as well. He hata te kupu nei, takoto ai, ki te tiriti. He hata rawa te kupu nei, takoto ai, ki te tiriti, ki te OuMaanei. Okay? But you understand what I'm saying, eh? There's some real in-depth workings, inner workings, and workings out, planning, schemings. Te rorirorike o te āhua ki I nima. That's what we're trying to make sure that you understand well and truly. And rorirori is shrewdness. Rorirorike o te āhua o te takoto mai o te kupu. Okay, funny how all these workings have gone on into the same document that had this real straight deal, well, seemingly straight deal. One of the Crown outcomes, remember, from our last kōrero, they could appear to have made a straight deal. Whereas in actual fact, you know, kua mōhio ke hoki ia mātou, ia tātou mātou, kei te he tēnā. Okay, this is no straight deal. Okay, that's all it looks like on the surface, and that's how well they crafted this OuMaanei. In order to, you know what I mean, craftily crafted this OuMaanei. Rori ke te āhua o te takoto mai o te kupu ki te OuMaanei nei. Okay? I mean, you don't carry out a heist of this sort of proportions merely in 5 minutes. That just doesn't happen that way. I mean, you've got to plan and plan and plan and plan. And that's before they even get to the real part. That's before they even get to write down one word. Okay, and then what did we say originally after we had finished our studies and we had to present our kōrero? When did I do that? 2021, 2022, 2023. Over those years, I presented our findings. And what did I say to you then? I said to you, e tatauma, that, even in that point in time, I mentioned to you that highly, shrewdly put together and manipulated was this particular document. Okay? And that there was no way, in all honesty, as far as we could see, we didn't want to give too much away in that time. But we certainly gave TeTiriti a whole different meaning. Whether or not many of our people took it on, and most didn't. And in fact, they wrongly, their attitude towards us was, oh, kai te he koutou. Yeah, I'd caution people from saying that to me. Okay? I'd caution anybody in the mutu from saying that to me. Kai te he ahau, I taku reo, te whakapā ke hānei, I tēnei. You know, I TeTiriti, you know, I would take it highly offensively, a statement like that given to me. Okay? But funny thing, in that time, this is, funnily enough, what some people were sort of driving at through a lot of their commentary around the mutu. A lot of different people discuss our translations, etc., etc. And it was quite amazing, the huge differences that were out there. I guarantee you after we've disclosed all of the information in the 10 to 12 episodes of this kōrero that we do, that most of those people change their mind about that. Okay? I mean, this is our reo. This is our reo. We are asking the Crown to take note of how, fraudulently, to manipulate and deceitfully, and within their forms of corruption, their feudal way of doing things that they still had in that time in 1840. Regardless of what was going on around the world, something quite different was going on here in 1835 and even 1840. One thing we do notice is how careful they were that the international audience did not know exactly what they were up to. Okay, what exactly were they up to in the motu? I'll tell you. They were out to commit fraud. They were out to pull off a heist of massive proportions. And they've done it. But we've got them right where we want them. And they're snapped. And they need to come clean. They need to come clean, the Crown in Westminster and the New Zealand Crown Corporation. Okay, but let's look at what we're saying, the version of our translation says, ko te tuatahi. Ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga. I'll just do ko te tuatahi first, because it's to us it's our understanding of ko te tuatahi in a context of a document like this. It's sort of a statement that was intended to be broader and intended to be more indicative to the reader of exactly what the content, the specific unique and special place that the contents had within this document. It fell short. Ko te tuatahi, the first. That's really what that says, literally, the first. But we moved away from that because we know intently what they were trying to say. Okay? And to keep it concise, like they were trying to keep it concise too as well, we said in the first. In the first. Okay, the Waitangi Tribunal, in their version, I've got their version here, they translate theirs as Article the First. See what I mean? They're just taking all the context into consideration. They're saying, we'll translate all these contexts right across the board, just like that, and we'll be totally confident about that and say that this says Article the First. And that's not true. That's not what that says. Okay? If you're a native speaker of the reo, and these people obviously are not, and native speakers of this reo, that's not what that says. Okay, do you get the idea of what I'm talking about here? There's lots and lots of context being missed right across the board. Why? Because these translators don't know this reo as well as they think. Why? Because we don't speak one reo right across the board, as much as Tūhoe wants everyone to believe. And that reo isn't called totally Māori, like Tūhoe wants everyone to believe. And awa. Kai te he tēnā kōrero. I know, tō mātou reo, o roto Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi, e harai te reo Māori, engari tonu. He reo Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura. He Māori kai roto, he Māori tonu kai roto, But he reo Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura. Okay? No such thing as a reo Māori, really. There's a reo, our reo all has Māori in it, but he rereke tō tēnā, tō tēnā, tō tēnā, I tēnā, tō tēnā, I tēnā. Okay? One from the other, our Māori is different one from the other. Why? Because that's what we are. We are super tribal. And those are the indications of that, why we're so different in those small but unique and very significant ways, fundamental ways. Okay, same thing with translating this still. There's some little fundamental context that if you miss, he haere noiho, te āhua ki tō whakatauira mai, whakatakuto mai ke mai anō, I te āhua o te wairua o te kupu, I te takoto o te kupu, I te nīrea. Okay? You're likely to get those things quite inaccurately translated, no matter how broad or across the board you can be. Okay, in the first. And this is what the reo version says again, ko ngā rangatira o te waka minenga, me ngā rangatira kātua hoki ki hai uru ki taua waka minenga. Aroha mai, ka tikura wātu ki te kuini o ingarani, ke tonu atu, dash, te kāwanatanga kātua, o rātou wenua. Okay, and as we said in the first, this is what we say that says, the sovereign chiefs, all of the context taken into account and explained as well in the translation. The sovereign chiefs of the confederation with all of those of the sovereign chiefs that did not join with that confederation grant in absolute to the Queen of England forever, dash, governance capability that is of the same in capacities as that exists presently in their lands. Okay, now let's look at what the tribunal says. That says, Article the first, he apiti kupu ke tēnā, we all know in any translation you can't do that. You can't do that. Okay? And they've added an additional word in there that actually isn't in the wording of what's been translated. It just says ko te tuatahi. There's no word in there that says article. Korekau, nothing at all. So adding an extra word in there, to give it that across the board feel and definition, it doesn't capture the context of that original ko te tuatahi. That original ko te tuatahi, ana context, ana matapaki, ki ana I tēnei, he āhuatanga nunui ke katoa anō, kai roto kai ngā kupu e whai mai nei. Koina nā tānai kōrero nei, so, there's something very unique, very special about the words to follow. That's really what they want to say. They translated that as article the first. Because they did not say that, that can be said to be added to the context which they wanted to show that they had done this in 1 to 3 days. And that's all. That does not mean to say that they could not have put that into its right context. See? So you have to take all these things on board when you're thinking about translating this style. Because if you don't know this style, then you're likely to miss all of that altogether. Okay? And because it's Reo Hapu, we have to look at these things in depth and seriously. Very, very seriously. Because if it's Reo Hapu iwi, then it's reo about very intimate relations and communications, and very personal, and of a huge magnitude. Okay? But still, you know, makawa hoki tātou, te āpiti kupu nei, you know, mea tiai. You know, you can't do things like that. Add a word in there that actually isn't in there. Okay? Article the first. Now this is what they say. The chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes of New Zealand and the separate and independent chiefs. See, there's a lot going on in there that actually isn't in the original. That's not what the original says. They're adding extra words in there. Okay? It's going to get more interesting once we get to He Whakaputanga and we look at the Reo Hapu iwi being utilised in there as well. Again, they utilise Reo A Hapu iwi in there. But they use the word iwi in there, iwi. Okay? It's going to be interesting once we get to the tribunal's translation of that. Okay? Because what this shows is a lack of understanding of te Hauhauaomo and where our tribes are concerned, the actual concepts, the structures, the processes, the systems of our tūpuna, mātua, and exactly how they did things and understood things in that time. That's not what's being translated here. What's being added is a cross-the-board, generalized understanding, a Māori understanding of the style. You know, you get that racist side of that, where the colonial are telling you, this is how you should think about this. Think about that. Think about that just for a moment. Because if you're going to listen to that, then all you are is a kurutau. If you're of our super tribal nations, all you are is a kurutau. If you're going to listen to things like that. The same thing that Tūhoe wants you to be is just the kurutau. Okay, because they like that. Anyone they look down at as teina is just a kurutau, and in fact, a tau reka reka. Quite feudal, the Tūhoe way, when you think about it. Quite a feudal way of doing things. You can understand the crown being like that, but Tūhoe, I can't understand that. Because our hapu iwi, we're not like that. The hapu iwi, we're not like that. Okay, I understand awa does things just like the Tūhoe do. When it comes to Tina, well, yeah, as far as we understand all of the other of the hapu iwi of the country, we're not like that. So they're the only ones that are like that. They're quite feudal, the way they treat their juniorships. They're like slaves. There's like this real superiority-inferiority complex going on. The the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes of New Zealand and the separate and independent chiefs. I mean, there's no indication of separate in te reo. There's no indication of that. You're getting these added contexts in here just to give it that effect of straight across the board, right across the board, understanding of te reo. It's not worth putting a straight across the board understanding of this reo, because this reo is Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura. HawhauaoMo. I mean, there's no straight across the board general understanding of this reo at all in the way we speak it. The way we speak it, he takotoranga katoa i te reo o te hapu iwi. E kōrero nei i te reo. And you have to take into consideration too the different contexts that come with that. Moai Hapu has their way of conveying that and carrying that. Te awa Hapu iwi has their way of carrying that. And Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura has theirs. Okay, very unique aspects to the whole of the argument. And that's why we need to take all of these contexts into greater consideration, far greater than what the tribunal has done here. Okay, who have not, ani, and the separate, that's what they say here, and independent chiefs who have not become members of the Confederation cede to Her Majesty the Queen of England absolutely and without reservation all of the rights and powers of sovereignty. Did you get a load of all of that? Is that exactly what it's saying there in the reo? Kai te he tēnā. Tino he. Did you get a load of that? Okay, more added kupu to give it that across the board Māori in the modern day context. See, now other context, and people use this a lot, and a lot of the translations were like that. They gave it a modern day context, across the board context. And that's not what this reo has. This is our reo. And it does not have, most of these words are not in there. Okay? Without reservation, all of the rights, I should imagine that if I can remember back to the actual English version, I know we've got a copy, but I would have needed to go into our Lumia office and search for that copy amongst all the files and records in there. I just didn't have time to do that. So just as well to use this one. I mean, it basically says the same thing. It's got the same sort of slant on it, the same sort of angle, just in far better English, English that is more modern and understandable and across the board in terms of today's English, formal English, which is not, by the way, how this deal is quite written. Okay? Try to understand that context as well. Okay, so who have not become members of the Confederation cede to Her Majesty the Queen absolutely and without reservation all of the rights and powers of sovereignty. Where does it say all of that? You know, which the said Confederation or individual chiefs respectively exercise or possess, or may be supposed to exercise or to possess over their respective territories as the sole sovereigns thereof. It just gets more and more vague as we go along. Okay? Too many added kupu in there. Too many added kupu in there. Too much of an added attempt to generalize it and give it that right across the board feel that this actually happened and everything was seeded. Kei te he tēnā. Okay? Right, let's get on to article the second. Okay? Ko te tuara again in the second. Ko te kuini o ingarani ka wakarite, ka wakai, ki ngā rangatira, ki ngā hapu. Okay, ki ngā hapu. Dash, ki ngā tāngata kātoa o Nuitirani, te tino rangatiratanga o rātou wenua, o rātou kāinga, me o rātou tāunga katoa. Funny that we get that in the first part of the second article. Because according to the tribunal, we just ceded all of that. So how can we cede all of that, yet we know it's going to be promised in the second? Right at the start there. Doesn't make sense, does it? Doesn't make sense. But they wanted that part in there. Why? Because its main purpose was to assure all of those tupuna that attended, and assure all of the tupuna that attended signings right throughout the country, e tātou mā, that there was nothing to worry about and their sovereignty was intact and well cared for and looked after and safe. Okay? Okay, let me translate that first part. In the second, the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the sovereign chiefs and to the united tribes and or super tribes, that's Hapu, dash, to all the peoples of New Zealand. Okay, because that's what we mean by Nuitirani, in a very universal fashion. That koinana, tāna meani, Nuitirani, not Nuitireni, Nuitirani. So we're appealing to the wider audience. Ne? Kai te pai? You understand that context, ne? Okay? We want this to have wider ramifications and influence. The sphere of influence just got bigger. Okay? Oina nā, tā te ariki me te hapu, tā te tūpuna, e noho atu, ake atu ana, ki rato ki taua huihuinga. Te whakaminenga mai nei o ngā tūpuna. That's what they were hearing. They go, ka pai, pai tēnā. You know, because to them, this was never about just them. And they went there with those intentions. This was always about everybody else. Ngā tūākana, ngā ariki, rātau, you know, the most chiefly, they wanted to see the whole of this lawlessness thing going on in the country all wrapped up. Okay? Dash, to all the peoples of New Zealand, absolute autonomy or total sovereignty over their lands, residences and estates, synonymous with all considered treasured heirlooms by them. Okay? There's a lot of context in there that the tribunal fails to recognise, just like they did in the first article there. But they added all these other items that aren't in the reo in there, okay, just to give it that across the board, general Māori understanding there. Yeah? Because this Māori thing that we're going on about here, this Māori context that we're talking about here in the modern day, doesn't actually exist. There's no such race as a Māori race. Rarotonga or Kukiairani might refer to themselves as Māori. We don't. Highly. Necessarily we don't. Not necessarily. In te tiri o te moana Hawaii ki tai, o in te tiri o te moana Aotearoa. We don't consider the huge majority of the Hapu iwi, as you well know, the top 5 or the seniorships amongst the Hapu iwi of the country, hundreds of thousands of ancestries, do not consider themselves Māori. That's the huge majority of the country. And only those under Te Tini o Toi, some of those, and some of those under Awa, some of those under Tūhoe. Perhaps some of Te Atiawa Nui no Runga Te Rangi, but not all. We know Te Atiawa Nui no Runga Te Rangi, and they're not that silly. Okay, so it's mere juniorships, and that'll be right too. There's a bit of an influence there, because a lot of them, especially those of Te Atiawa Nui no Runga Te Rangi, but you do get some within OuMaanei, a Tūhoe, Awa, you know, moe ariki, moe rangatira, me rarotonga, me kukiairani, me te Māori anō kaira nā tua huatanga. E ke nepa ki tā rātou Māori tonu anō hoki rātou. Well, we don't know, but we certainly know that those that do come from there, and those that have a most direct line from there, and kept that most direct line, can certainly say pea, he Māori. Okay? But the huge majority of the country, and all the seniorships right up to Moai Hapu iwi, koreka, harai te Māori. He Moai, he te awa, he Tahumaakaaka nuimatua o Tutura, he mā moe, he mō riori, koe nā katoa mātai, koe nā hoki katoa. Koe nā hoki katoa mātau i ngā tūākana i te motu. Me te tahi mano rai o mātau. Okay? Article the 2nd, this is the Tribunal's translation. Her Majesty the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand and to the respective families and individuals. I feel ke hoki tērā. I feel ke hoki tērā I roto te reo. Tērā katoa is not even in there. Too much āpiti kupu going on here, for sure. Most of the first articles are āpiti kupu. Same here, āpiti kupu, that isn't there. I think they take notice that of the simple fact that in some cases, as they're using the reo, they're leaving a lot to be desired, and that can be said. But what they're not noticing, the tribunal, is that's being done intentionally. See, that's what they're not realising. And so they're adding words here and there. That's probably what's urged. But tēnā hoki anō te tribunara o Waitangi kia pē nā tonu te āhua ki tā rātau e takoto ai ki te kupu whakapākeha mai nei i te āhua o te kōrero nei. Okay? Yeah, just disgusting that. That's a disgusting part of the translation. You know, there's no mention of any of that. There's no mention of the dash. And it does have impact in this kōrero. It does manipulate things in this kōrero, that dash. It does manipulate the deliverer of that kōrero into saying it in a certain way and giving a certain context, and the receiver gets a certain context as well. And it's not all of this stuff. Okay? What's the context that the receiver gets? Straight to the point. That's why this seems far more of a straight deal. See? Anna? Koina nā te mea, you know, me I takoto pēnāna, pēnā aina, te āhua o te whakapākeha, o te tribunara, then they'd have been far more accurate if they had have thought about that when they made this translation. It's attempt is to be far too across the board, far too general, and they're far too overconfident in that particular style in the translation, and they've got a lot wrong as a result. Okay, they've got a lot wrong as a result. Okay, I mean, kei whea hoki tēnei katoa. Kei whea I roto I te kupu nei, I te puka nei. You know? Kei whea, and to the respective families and individuals. Kei whea ke hoki te era. You know? Thereof, the full exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates, forests, fisheries, and other properties which they may collectively or individually possess. Kai whea tērā. Kai whea tērā I roto I te kupu. Takoto ai ki te OuMaanei. And this is the Waitangi Tribunal, not just a government organisation, a government entity, but a crown entity as well. Okay, yeah, if this is the poor ability that they have to translate TeTiriti, then we've got big problems in the Moteo. We've got big problems, and we've already assured you of that. Okay? And aroha mai e tātou mā, I've gone on a bit longer than I proposed to. We should have been completed about 1:30, but what I'm going to do is continue on. And the reason why I do that when I continue on is so that we don't go on about a half an hour over. I was hoping to be finished by now. But let's, huge difference, from our translation of, the correct context. No added words. No added context. Exactly what's on the page. Dash. To all the peoples of New Zealand. Absolute autonomy or total sovereignty over their lands, residences and estates, synonymous with all considered treasured heirlooms by them. Only the words that are there, full stop. Okay? And what did we have for the second part of in the second? But on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs confederation, along with the further sovereign chiefs, grant to the Queen the right of preemption and the purchase of lands among those of the lands. Now, what did we say in the last kōrero? Our tūpuna would have been grumbling and groaning at the second part. Why? Kore kau. Kore kau o te tika o te mana tika rānei e tukunana te tāngata, tauiwi, tāngata no mai waho, te hapu, ki te wenua. Hai te pai? Kore ka. Hai hoko, hai ahara nei, pērā tonu rā I tā te hoko. Okay? The land wasn't a commodity. There were rightful ways of being able to utilize land. Okay? Tuku was usually the way. But we were not interested in transacting land in any non-customary way. Okay, and that's what this proposes, the second part. They all would have grumbled and groaned at that, and would have been in total disagreement with the whole of the second part. But this is what we said that it means. But on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs, nice and simple, nice and simple. Far too complex and complicated, though. They've gone too airy-fairy in the tribunal. Whilst they've tried to translate right across the board and generally in a Māori, modern-day Māori fashion, ana, he pērā tonuke, airy-fairy, me te pitikupu anō. Okay. Right, and along with the TeTaiHauauru, but on the other, where am I? But on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs of the Confederation, along with the further sovereign chiefs, grant to the Queen the right of preemption. Yeah, kore kau I te tika tēnāna, because they would have been highly in disagreement with that. And for juniors, remember, I told you that most of them there were juniors from the actual Hapu iwi that they represented there. At the signing now, they would not have had a chance to really think about that. So they would have grumbled and groaned, yeah, for sure. They would have not have had a chance to really think about the impacts or the advantages of that. Around about 1850, they've had a long time to consider the advantages. What do the most juniors start to do? They start to transact the land. They let them in to transact. They let them in to utilize the land as a commodity. Why? Huge advantages for Tina, for juniors, especially most junior. Okay? But on the other hand, the sovereign chiefs of the Confederation, along with the further sovereign chiefs, grant to the Queen the right of preemption in the purchase of lands among those of the lands conceded to by the proprietors of those lands. And that's all it says. It doesn't say all this added stuff that the tribunal says. And then dash. Okay? Now let's see what we say after that in the second dash. At the negotiated price or value as agreed to by them with purchasers so instructed by the Queen to act as purchase agents on her behalf. How would we translate that? Kiai in the reo. Kiai. He kai hoko ano kiai. That's how we would translate that. But what did they have? He kai hoko mōna. Mōna. It's more of a modern, or more of a learner of the reo context going on there. Okay. Now let's see what the tribunal has for that last part. But the chiefs of the United Tribes and the individual chiefs yield. Did you get all of that? Did you get all of that? Wow. Wow. there's some airy-fairy stuff going on there. But the chiefs of the United Tribes and the individual chiefs, kai whea ke hoki tērā. Kai whea. Kai whea ko ia I roto tonu anō I te āhua o te takoto mai o te kupu nei. Kai whea hoki ko ia. You know, we translated exactly what is there. You know, we didn't dilly-dally around. Kare hoki mātou I takaroa ai. You know? And we translated exactly what's there. Not, ki te āpiti kupu nei, a te tarai piunara. Okay? But the chiefs of the United Tribes and the individual chiefs yield to Her Majesty the exclusive right of preemption. Yeah, I think we used seed. Yeah, well, sort of the same thing. I mean, yield is a much more impressionistic and, it's a much more subjugated sense of defining of the whole of what happened there. We would say it's just a mere seed. Yeah, not really a yield, because it took a long time. Hey, I mean, they had to debate this through all the seniorships who stood up, like what I told you for Wairarapa Tararua. Our seniorship stood up against any transactions at all, any access to land at all. And they stood up, and the main standoffs happened between 1843 in Wairarapa Tararua and 1851-2-3. Okay, there's the whole 13 years that happened. And then what did the most junior do? Ara, langi wakaoma, hoko nā tuai. Okay? So they got sold for a song too. So, and the individual chiefs yield to Her Majesty the exclusive right of preemption over such lands as the proprietors thereof may be disposed to alienate their... Yeah, all that airy-fairy stuff is not in there. E tatauma, at such prices as may be agreed upon. Yeah, okay. Between the respective proprietors, well, that's not in there. All it really says is as the proprietor thereof. That's all. Doesn't say anything more. There's nothing to say, as may be agreed upon between the proprietors, respective proprietors, and persons appointed by Her Majesty to treat with them in that behalf. It says on her behalf. So ki ai. He kai hoko ki ai. Tēnā tangata he kai kōrero I te hoko nei o te wenua. Kuia nei, kuia kai te kōrero ano hoki nei I te āhua o te hoko. I te utsu, I te wāri tonu hoki o te utsu. Okay? Hoi anō e mea tiana tēnei katoa ki aia, ki aia I tā te kuini. Ara I te kuini. Aroha mai. I te kuini. So they're, being purchase agents on the Queen's behalf, on her behalf. Okay? Pretty disgusting, really? When you look at the tribunal's translation there. And then we get the third article, ko te tuatoru. In the third, that's what we've got, and we'll go up to the first dash here. Hei waka ritenga mai hoki tēnei mō te wakaetanga ki te kāwanatanga o te kuini. Okay? Mō. I want to again take your attention to the use of mō there. Another appeal to people, he tāngata ke huki mātau, ka tahi anō, ka tī mata te kōrero I te rea. Okay? Ka tī mata, kai te ako tonu mātau. You know, the use of more in this case is a very modern day concept that even in that time was a modern day concept. And perhaps was introduced through TeTiriti. Or perhaps more was being utilized within our tribes at that time. That's some of the kōrero that we have for the kupu more. Because we don't actually use that in Tahumaakaaka, nuimatua. That's not actually a word, a part of our vocabulary. So they've added it in there for effect. And it has that impact, you know, it does. It does. Mea kua hau tētahi o te tūpuna nei. Waka rongorongo ai te kupu nei. Kua tino rongo ke iāna. Iāunana. Te āhua o te takotoranga mai, te takotoria mai o te kupu nei. Okay? And they're really wanting to have that effect. But e tama, you know, we know this took 2 to 3 years. I mean, let's face it. Hey, ne? Are you with me on that? This took 2 to 3 years. This didn't take 1 to 3 days. Okay, e tatama? And what do we have here for the first part of the third article? This was also set out for the purposes of the negotiated arrangement for full consent to the governance of the Queen. Okay, in the third. Okay. Let's see what the tribunal has. Now, they don't have the markings of TeTiriti, which is what you should have. If you are writing on any document, this is plagiarism, by the way. I mean, this is a legal office and entity of the Crown and the government. This is poor. This is plagiarism. Okay? Because you're supposed to, you utilize any book material, any source from anywhere, and they're obviously taking this off TeTiriti, the real copy of TeTiriti, and this is what they're saying it says, without even adding to it any of the other markers on TeTiriti, or the wordings exactly, you know, what they might say. So you can't tell me you can translate it exactly in the way that they've translated it here. I doubt that. Okay, Article the 3rd, this is what they have in the tribunal. In consideration thereof, Her Majesty the Queen of England extends to the... That's not what that says. What are they going on about? What are they going on about? Let's go back and see what we said. In the 3rd, this was also set out for the purposes of the negotiated arrangement for full consent to the governance of the Queen. Which again, if you look at that phrase in the real and in English, you can see the double-sidedness in that phrase, In one sense it says, this was also set up for the purposes of the negotiated arrangement for full consent to the governance of the Queen. Yet if we put that slant that they put on the first article, this says, only the governance of the Queen. See? That's what we're consenting to, only the governance of the Queen. See the double-sidedness? And see what happens to the meanings of some of these phrases? Yeah. And I really don't know where the tribunal gets theirs from. In consideration thereof, Her Majesty the Queen of England extends to the natives of New Zealand. You know? So they haven't even translated the first part up to the dash. And then after the dash, that the Queen of England resolves further to extend to all Indigenous peoples of New Zealand her protections, granting to them also all of the rights and privileges synonymous with her very own subjects granted to the peoples of England. Okay? Looks like an added context in there when we put to, but we just wanted to make that clear. Okay? That is, referring to additionally the peoples of England, that they are usually granted the same rights and privileges. Okay? That's more so, what they've done is translated after the dash. They haven't even translated the first part. I find that a bit strange. Okay? Surprising how they translate the word resolves further to extend to all Indigenous peoples. They say they're native people, natives. To all Indigenous peoples, and that is the word here. This is what we say in Te Reo. This is what it says in TeTiriti. Ka tiakina e te kuini o ingarani, ngā tāngata Māori katoa. Okay, they've translated that as natives. The natives. That's contextually actually right out of context. Yeah, that's right out of context. Yeah, that's not what Māori with a lowercase m. And I wanted to point out that this says Māori with a lowercase m. They translated it and put natives with a capital N for Napier. How do you like that? How do you like that? You know, we've translated it as Indigenous peoples. Okay? Or those indigenous to the land. Which is what Māori refers to. The Māori o te ao. O rātou noho noho maini. Ki tau wawinu. Okay? The Māoriness of the world around them, of those associated with that land. So what we're really referring to there is the indigenous character of these people, not capital N natives. Funny translating there, eh? I don't know why. They're obviously people that have tried all but in vain to look like they know te reo. They consider it a reo Māori because it's obvious with their right across the board generalised, overly generalised, let's say, context, translation in terms of the context to which they understand this reo. So they don't know the reo very well. Not this reo, that's for sure. This is my reo. Okay? I would love to talk to these people, these particular people who are the individuals responsible for these translations, because they're way out. Way out. They need to be able to stay disciplined and focus on exactly what's there and translate every context, because contexts in the reo are so very important, and so much more important, more so in a document like this, because we miss those. And you know what, this fraudulence, you might as well say to the Crown, here, have it on a platter. But we're not about to let them have that and do that for the Crown, okay? Ka tiakina e te kuini o ingarani ngā tāngata Māori katoa, that's Māori with a lowercase m, which suggests we're only talking about the world around those people, the world that they live in. So it suggests indigenous relationship and association with the land. Okay? Māori and the world around them. Okay? Koina nā hoki te ahua o te wairua. Remember me saying that Māori also within our cultural, super tribal, spiritual character, we would translate that as the particular spirituality we have managed to become a part of. Okay? As descendants or parts of. Not necessarily descendants. I mean, we were created by the atiatuatanga. Okay? In oneness with the nature around us, with the world around us. Okay? We need to seriously think about those sorts of things and stop thinking that we're a totally Māori race, and that's false. That's absolutely false. We do have a reo that is, we can see similarities right through. Now, whether we call that Māori or not, some people may be translating our reo as Māori. Well, there's definitely Māori kairoto. Super tribally, he Māori kairoto. But we can't say that Māori is the same from Hapu iwi to Hapu iwi. We cannot say that. Because in my Hapu iwi is Tahumaakaaka nuimatua Hapu iwi. It's unique to Te Awa Hapu iwi, which is totally Te Awa Hapu iwi, which is unique to Moai Hapu iwi. See, you can't say that. You can't say that, but we do have similarities right throughout. We've got no problems with that. Okay. Ngā tāngata Māori katoa o nuitirani, ka tukua kia rātou, ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi ki ana mea, ki ngā tāngata o ingarani. And with all those contexts in mind, revolved around and within all of those kupu, that the Queen of England resolves further to extend to all indigenous peoples of New Zealand capitals her protections, granting to them also all the rights and privileges synonymous with her very own subjects granted to the peoples of England. We could have left out the commas there when we put two, but we actually put them in, and there's no commas in the original, so we probably made a mistake there. Okay, we don't mind pointing out our mistakes, putting in the commas there. Yeah, I've just noticed that. Yeah, but those markings are not on the original, so we're not having to translate any of those markings at all. The peoples of England. Okay? And so let's see what they have. Oh, well, they've still got the same thing. What they translated after the dash is exactly what they've got in there. In consideration thereof, Her Majesty the Queen of England extends to the natives of New Zealand her royal protection and imparts to them all of the rights and privileges of British subjects. Atapai. Which brings us to the end of our further in-depth analysis of TeTiriti, the OuMaanei. Getting interesting, e tatauma. But there's some very important context in there to think about. The dashes mean a lot more than some of you might think. The R or the E says so much more. Te reo hapu iwi is so much more complex than you would understand. Okay? How did they manipulate those into this document? And how were they looking to utilize those within the whole scheme of things integrated within the whole of the planning and rorirorike te ahua te takoto mai o TeTiriti. Although we're talking about the real version, I'll come back to the real version to finish off. We're talking about the real version and how that was instrumental in being able to pull off the whole of this heist. Ne? Why? You have to take note of all the markings, all the words, more, the use of simple little particles like that. Te reo hapu iwi kai roto, te kupu, Māori, lowercase m. I think it's in the preamble we get Māori with the capital M. Now that's a bit different. That refers to the our tūpuna as a particular Māori people or race of people. Which absolutely did not exist at Tatauma. Not then, and not actually now. Okay? Look at that context. We'll get a lot more of the lowdown on all of that when we get back to the maki, te tai tukarau, AukatiTai, and we talk again some more on TeTiriti. Aroha mai, iahua kahia ki roa, te ahua te tō roa kene, o taku kōrero I tēnei wā tonu ne. But yeah, a matter of having to, in order to get all the kōrero out there. And make sure that you have all the understandings of every context going on there. But exactly what's in there. We don't want all this added stuff. Okay? Exactly what is in there. No matter what the similarity is of all the added stuff. And this was a big problem with all of the other translations. Again, with the Waitangi Tribunal, it's a little bit obvious. We count out that one too. But this is the effect, e tatauma, of the English version. That's the context I wanted you to get to. Okay? Because, our main aim is to have us focus on the Te Reo version, which is all very well and good, but we needed a kōrero, an episode of kōrero, a session with you within our analysis of the whole scheme of things, of the whole of exactly what went down here to pull off this heist, to understand fully the magnitude and how instrumental this document, the OuMaanei, the MagnaCarta, was in actually pulling off that heist. I'm so glad we went on to that English version there, because we can see the effect there. That was the outcome from the signings of the TeTiriti. They brought out the English version. Next minute, you see right across the motu, right across the world, the English version has all the push and pull. Right, isn't it so much better when we have an in-depth understanding of exactly what went on? We know all of the background, at least in part. We know all of the influences right in there on the actual event. We know all of those things that are missing from the usual kōrero. And we know all of the problems from past translations and interpretations. And wrongful interpretations on exactly what the original intentions were of TeTiriti, or the OuMaanei, or the MagnaCarta. Okay? I don't think we're going to want to leave our founding document in the current state. If if we think about it, I don't think we're going to want to leave it there. We're going to have to get it right, go back to the original intentions, and start again from there. Okay? And anyway, ko huiarau, te ruinanga ko huiarau, the Congress of ko huiarau of the multitudes is going to be up and running in no time. Okay? So, yeah, those people, be ready for us to take TeTiriti in its original form to the motu, to the courts, as we spoke about in the last kōrero, International Court, te mea. We're going to have to knock all this rubbish that our tūpuna ceded nothing in this land. And the Crown had better come to terms with that. And this is why we don't want you to takarua. Kei takarua mai, koutou. Kei takarua mai. Let's get it right from the outset. Let's understand exactly what's happened here. And what's happened here is we've been fraudulated. The Crown carried out a heist of massive proportions with a document of huge magnitude, international interest, national interest, that looked to pull off the heist, and it was done with the Te Reo version. Isn't it ironic that it's the legal version? Isn't that the way the Crown operates? What they call legal isn't necessarily altogether legal. I hope you've come to that understanding as well. Isn't this prevalent though? Isn't this exemplary and symbolic of workings of the Crown today? They're the same. They try to make out to us that they've changed. Well, we don't think so. Because they're operating the same feudal systems, because they're operating the same legal processes and systems e tatauma. Paidaro ke hoki e putsu ana tonu tata Crown. Okay? Father Lord, our understandings of the OuMaanei, Yehoia, had become so in-depth and so broadened, and especially when we focus on the exact wordings, Father Lord. Yehoia, especially when we focus on the nature of the lay of wording and how we get the straight deal. Yet it is not. You know that. You've always known that. Father Lord, as you take us on further through this journey with the rest of the motu, with the Crown, with the tribunal, with all those government and Crown entities in the country, help them to understand. There's no sense in messing about with this anymore. We need to knock all this racism, albeit systemial. We need to knock all this wrongful application of TeTiriti across this country, and all of the injustices need to be resolved. E tatauma, the whole lot. And we're not just talking about for 1 to 3%, Father. Yehoia, we're talking about the whole 100%. For each of the 7 Hapu iwi original to this country, as original as it gets, from when Captain Cook came to our shores. Father, Lord, Yehoia, we thank you so much that you brought us this far. We could have never done it without you. And Father, Lord, Yehoia, we thank you because we know you will take us all of the way. All the way to resolving all these injustices and ensuring that justice prevails for the manawenua, for the Hapu iwi, and their ariki of the country, their taiopuru ariki of the country. Thank you, Father, Lord, for committing yourself to, in Jesus' name, the assurance of justice for all our whānau, our hapu, our uri, and especially for our tamariki and mokopuna and all those generations to come. Thank you, Lord. We praise you and honour you, and we give you all of the glory. In Jesus' mighty name. Ka piti hono ka tātai hono, ko rātau rā tērā rātau, te kā nohi mate ki a rātau. Ka piti hono ka tātai hono, ko tātau mātonu anō tēnei tātau, ko te kā nohi ora ki a tātau mātau koau. Kai te mihi atu, tēnā rā tātau, a mauri ora, kahuri,